Hi. So we're going to continue with our series of designing solutions to problems from first principles. And today we're going to talk about designing a recommendation system for a platform like YouTube or Instagram or TikTok. Design it from scratch. And this will be useful for multiple reasons. It's just an interesting, intriguing, exciting problem to solve. But it's also going to be useful personally because I'm designing a system where personalization, according to users' taste, their preferences, is one of the integral pieces of the puzzle. So I think I'll be able to use some of these ideas that I'll be generating over the next 10, 20 minutes in my work that I just embarked upon. I have not done any work, so I think this will be different from that standpoint too. Usually, I do have some starting idea about these vlogs. I do have some starting notes, some outline, but over here we're just starting from scratch. I just wanted to see how I'd be faring without notes and without even having an idea about how I'd actually go about solving that particular problem. In which case, this is uh, video recommendation systems, right? So it'll be a fun one. Let's see. Let's see. So when you think of a platform like YouTube or TikTok or Instagram, what they're doing is they've got billions and billions and billions of videos. And then there's you. And you got your interests, your preferences, you got your taste around the kinds of videos, the kinds of artists you might like, creators you might like, right? And the problem that they're trying to solve for, and they've done a reasonably good job at it, with TikTok especially, people say its algorithm is very addictive. Even YouTube, a lot of people say that's one of the best algorithms out there in terms of recommendation system, right? They're obviously doing a pretty good job. What they're doing basically is suggesting the kinds of videos that they think, the algorithm thinks you would prefer to watch. That is, again, the core functionality of a recommendation system, right? The input is all the different videos, and the output is catered towards this one user, depending on their preferences, the taste, the likes, the dislikes, right? There's a problem that you, in a way, you can think of a recommendation system as a funnel, as a filter, multiple filters. Filter one would remove the obvious stuff that you might not be interested in, and then obviously the more refined the algorithm, the more the number of filters and more nuanced the filtering process would be. So let's take YouTube. We can talk about short videos, maybe it deserves special treatment. We'll think about it for a second, but let's just focus on YouTube because it is the biggest video platform on the planet, and they're obviously doing a bang up job. So I think the best way to do this would be to take the approach of a user journey from the very start to the app experience, to the user experience, right? So when you start out, and let's assume that there's no Google data that YouTube can use. For most people, when it's actually embark on starting to use YouTube, there's already a lot of associated data that Google can use, that YouTube can then get from Google, because it's part of the same company, that can then use to suggest videos based on that data, right? Like your search history, your location, different kinds of things of that nature. Now, there are two parts over here. If there's enough data on the user that we can make a reasonable guess, then we can use a collaborative filtering approach where we look at different other people in your demographics, in your region, who share similar interests, etc. And then we look at the kinds of videos that they interacted with, the kinds of videos that they liked, the kinds of videos that they disliked, etc. And we use that as a model, and we assume that because you are in that same age bracket, there's a lot of similarity between you and this group, this cohort, we can assume that there's going to be some convergence between their interests, the interests of that particular group, and you, right? So that's one starting point where, again, it would be reasonably successful because for most people, the interests tend to be pretty consensual, pretty convergent, right? So for example, the bestsellers, the movies which sell billions of, well, not billions, but hundreds of millions of tickets, right? There's a Pareto distribution. There are things that lots of people like, and there are things that are more niche in terms of the liking. And you can use that principle to provide suggestions based on the fact that there will be a lot of overlapping interests, a lot of overlapping preferences for most users. There'll always be outliers, But right now, you're just catering to the median case. Not just a median case, but you're catering to probably 75% of the population just using this approach. It wouldn't work for maybe 10% of the population, might not work for 25, but it would work for the majority, for the super majority of the population, right? So that's one approach. The second approach is where if you don't have any data on the user, then you again kind of you do have to start with the collaborative filtering approach from the very get-go. Otherwise, you can just give them random videos, but that would not, considering the sheer variety of videos, considering the sheer number of genres, the sheer number of things, the user would really end up wasting a ton of time, and again, that wouldn't be good for the from the user experience perspective. So you minimize the time wastage. Again, you got to assume that there's this person, we don't have any data on them, so what can we? Well, we get some reasonable data. We get at least the age, we get the region, we get the probably 5 data points might be enough to get some amount of content filtering system set up, right? The content filtering system that we talked about, where the user has been interacting with Google services for some time, over there you're taking a lot more data points into account, which would give you a lot more nuance, a lot richer experience in terms of the recommendations. The lower the number of data points, for example, if you're just giving your age and your region, let's say you're living in the UK and you're 25, then the system only can suggest based on those two metrics, right? And then again, there's a huge variation in 25-year-old people, 25-year-olds who live in the UK, right? So that wouldn't be too great. So you want to try to get as many data points as possible. So age and date, obviously, age and then you probably get some interest. For example, if they're into sci-fi, if they're into cosmology, if they're into quantum mechanics, if they're into tech, if they're into podcasts, etc. Again, you get those data points, and that allows you to build a better system, build a more refined system. So now we've got some semblance of a system set up, right? With those data points, you're going to have some recommendations, probably 50% of which are going to be useful, 50% of which are not going to be useful, which is better than, having 5% useful recommendations, which could have been the case if you just started with 2 data points. So with those 2 data points and with some interest that you give, you're in a pretty good position. But again, you want to try to get to 100% recommendation accuracy, right? And what does that mean? That basically means that for all the different videos that you recommend to the user would actually be interested in watching those, right? It would conform to the user's preferences and tastes. That's where you want to get to. So how do we bridge the gap between 50% to 100? Again, 50, it could be lower. It would be lower with those data points. It depends on the number of interest tags that you actually provided. But let's say that you provided 10 interest tags, then it probably would be 70-80%. But still, there's a huge gap between 80, and again, the last few percentage points, they are going to be the most difficult, but we'll try to get there. And you'll actually never be able to get there, because if you want to get to 100% accuracy, recommendation accuracy, you'd need to map the user from the inside out. As in, you would need to get information from the user that they even wouldn't be aware of. That's the level at which you need to operate for getting to 100%, but we'll get to that in probably 5 minutes, 10 minutes, I think. Right, so here we are. We've got this, we started interacting with this recommendation system, and now we're watching some videos. We can also provide feedback that, okay, this recommendation, it sucked. And we're assuming that we are not using LLMs. This is just going to be weighted. This is just going to be numerical. It's just going to be quantified. This is not going to involve any language tokens, this particular recommendation. There's no 2-layered recommendation system, though we can talk about it. Actually, let me make a note of that. So we are assuming a pretty simple ML model, not using any deep learning. You can, at some point the complexity is going to get to the point that we probably should start using the multiple layers, but for this, at this point, we don't need to, right? So we use a pretty simple ML modules to this, and then we suggest, and then the user interacts with these videos. We can use a weighted system, by the way, which would amplify the performance substantially. We don't see any weighted, I've never seen weighted systems. Rough estimates of those might be that you give 3 stars for the videos suggestions which are the absolute best, 2 stars for those which are surpass your expectations, 1 star for those which are okay, and 0 star if you don't want to see that, right? You can, if you want to be more intuitive, you can make a negative system, scaling system, or that a system that can convert into, that is negative from your perspective, but can and convert into numbers which can be easily handled by the ML systems, right? Because for a lot of these calculations, you actually don't want to have negatives to deal with. It would just complicate the calculations, right? So here we are. I've been interacting, you've been using this platform for some time, you've been liking some videos, you've even been giving baits. For example, I would give this video 10 stars, this video I'd give 0 stars, etc., right? And that makes the system more and more refined. The system would also pick up data points like how long you watched a particular video. You could pick data points around, well, the videos that you've disliked. Other data points could be some other data points could be the kinds of videos that you added to your playlist. So in that case, the algorithm could attach a 10 value, the highest value, to these recommendations, all sorts of things, right? And over time, by making the algorithm tunable, moldable by all this input, it's going to get better and better, and it's probably going to get to 95, 98%. The last few percentage points are the most difficult to get to, because you'll need to actually use words to get those last points. For example, there might be certain very niche interests, there might be certain niche preferences more than interests that you might have, right? Like you might like this topic, but you might not like these people talking about this topic for whatever reason, or you might not like this particular voice, or you might not like videos where, again, there might be things which might be happening under the surface that your brain might not have registered, but that would affect the way you rate these videos, right? And a lot of this information can only be gained through a neural implant in your brain, like a BCI implant, right? Like a Neuralink. So to get to 100% accuracy, we'd have to wait, I think, probably 5 years. But in that universe, once we got that system, then the implant, the device in your brain, it knows you so well, it knows you better than you know yourself, because there are things happening behind your consciousness and beyond your consciousness. Obviously, lots of subconscious activities. Even, for example, the release of chemicals in your brain, the way some of these patterns, some of these dynamics happen, these are not happening in your conscious knowledge, right? If think about it this way. Like, you might be feeling the blues for some reason, but you can't verbalize it, or you might not even realize that you're feeling the blues, and that might make you behave or act in a certain way. Imagine an implant which knows that and can recommend the perfect video to cheer you up, to get you off that mood, get you off that slump, right? Get you right in the feels. Or let's say you got a date night planned, and you want to plan, and you want to feel, and you're feeling giddy or whatever, right? Or whatever, right? Like, you can think of a number of situations. And so this would be the very ultimate manifestation of a recommendation system. There's also something to be said for serendipity, right? So that could be something which could be focused so much on the kinds of things, interactions that you had, that it could ignore everything that falls outside of that mold. But there are loads of things, because our minds are so rich, the number of interests that we have, they're so varied, they're so diverse, they're so broad, not just deep, right? For example, I'm interested in like tons of things. So if that's the case, then you probably want to incorporate a level of serendipity. And again, you can have that as a toggle, like you can increase that to 100%, in which case you're obviously going to get random videos, but so you don't want to increase it to that level. But you probably want to have, like, again, you're having a very abstract level conversation over here, so I'm not actually designing the algorithm which could take into account serendipity. But if you were, then the equation might look like, it wouldn't be a simple equation. It would be an ML model which would have a ton of moving parts. But assuming, the most simplest case, right? It's just a simple equation where we've got all these variables which correspond with different interests, different genres, different kinds of things. Like, let's just say it's one equation which is super long. we could add an element of serendipity at the very end, and whose value could be 0, whose value could be 1, and whose value you could toggle. So I think Google's "I'm feeling lucky" was probably an example of that, where let me check. Actually, I was off about that substantially. So the way that system works is that if you're searching for something and you click on that button, it takes you to the website that Google thinks is the only resource that you need. So it's got high confidence in that website being what you need, basically. So it's not quite what I was thinking. Right. Okay, so back to the point, right? You could set up your system, your algorithm, in such a way that you would receive 99% of 99 video recommendations perfectly tuned to your taste, and the model that is created of you based on all your interactions, based on all the data points on you. And then you could have one video out of every 100, or one video out of every 50, or whatever ratio you want, that could be serendipitous. And again, even the level of serendipity, right? It's not just, completely random. It could be something which is just, so think of the space of your interest. It's going to be bounded, right? Okay, so there's all the different videos in the world on YouTube. So think of that in a volume, in a 3D volume. And then there are the videos which interest you, right? So that's a tiny, tiny subsection of this ball. Another way to think about this is that, actually, this is a pretty good metaphor, a pretty good analogy. So the entire universe is a YouTube universe. The physical universe that we live in is a YouTube universe. And the galaxy that you live in, all the planets, all the stars in this galaxy, they're the things that you might be interested in. Now, the galaxies close to us, to our galaxy, where you might be somewhat interested. So it's not just a binary thing, right? You might be 10% interested in certain things, 20% interested in certain things. So there's a gradient, there's a descent in the values. But 99% of the things that you're probably going to be 0% interested. I don't know. I don't think that's the case for me. Yeah, I was just gonna go on a rabbit hole of talking about curiosity and the optimal level of curiosity with the human mind that we have and the goals that we have for our lives. The short version that I was gonna give a spiel on is that you can't be boundlessly curious if you want to be effective. You can be boundlessly curious if all you care about is learning and understanding the world for the joy of it, for the fun of it. But if you actually want to operate, if you actually want to move the needle, if you actually want to have a lever on the world, then you will need to constrain your curiosity space substantially. Which we're going to talk about that some of the time. But so with this analogy, the videos, the genres, the types of videos, channels that you might be somewhat interested in and they're close by. And so the serendipity component of the model might work such that there could be tunes or toggles inside of this, right? Like, do you want to be completely serendipitous, as in completely random, or do you want to be adjacent serendipitous, as in, an example could be people, right? Like, you might have a certain type, and let's say that there's a service which, let's say you want to meet someone new, and the service finds you the perfect match, right? Based on its understanding of who you want and who you are. And if you say complete serendipitous, that I could just pick someone randomly and then put that, but that wouldn't be too much use for you. So it could have some level of serendipity, as in, that could be, instead of always looking for the maximum amount of convergence between you and the object, it could look for 50% convergence. That could be, that's a useful way to think about serendipity in this context. So you don't want to always maximize the convergence. Sometimes but also you don't want to minimize, you don't want to reduce it to 0, because then that's completely random. And the odds are that a random video is just not going to be up to the task, right? So you want to toggle the serendipity. It can get more complex than this, but we can keep the discussion simple for the time being. So obviously many other data points that could be taken into account. For example, if you got a bunch of really close friends and you hang out with them all the time, then YouTube could suggest videos, could use the serendipity element, incorporating that information, right? And obviously, if YouTube has information on all the users as it does, then I don't think it does it this way, but it could potentially give you suggestions based on the kinds of videos that your friends have watched, and there would obviously be a substantial overlap, right? The convergence, the interest factor would be substantial in this case, because it's fair to assume that if your friends like a video, you're pretty likely to like it because you obviously have a similar lifestyle, a similar social, uh, all the different indicators that are relevant. You're pretty close to your friend, right? Um, so that, yeah, there are these little things that could be done to optimize it, to not even optimize it, but just to vary things a bit differently. Like there are different things that you could optimize it for, the social element of it. For example, if there's a video which isn't in your wheelhouse, but it's super popular in your region, you could suggest that, right? It's just not optimizing for what you care about, but it could be optimizing for a different thing, which is, again, that there's a related thing that I want to touch upon, right? So YouTube, and you actually hear this about social media platforms like TikTok, that's keeping your hedonistic, um, dopamine seeking rat running, right? Like you want the dopamine hit, so it's keeping you. And with Twitter, it's keeping you engaged, right? That's the way they. We're going to talk about that particular system some other time. But so there are these little emotional, well, not little, but there are these emotional responses that these videos want to get from you. So what if we could design a system that actually takes into account your own values and the way you actually want to use YouTube, right? Let's just focus on YouTube or Instagram or TikTok, right? Which are the major video platforms. So the way this might work then is that when you ask someone why they use YouTube, for example, I use YouTube a lot, mostly for watching videos about AI, ML, learning things, but I'm also interested in lots of physics stuff, lots of tech stuff, lots of podcasts, lots of business stuff, etc. Right? And I also I'm also a sucker for sci-fi movies. So invariably, I get recommendations for sci-fi movie clips, which I sometimes just cannot resist. Um, but if you are to ask my higher self, or put differently, if I were to design the system myself, if I had the option to state my preferences, I would say to it that just keep things completely educational. I don't want any entertainment from YouTube. Well, right. So you could, ideally, the system should allow you to focus. Like we could attach meta tags to different videos, and that would allow users to have a greater control on the way they use YouTube, right? Not just in terms of being aware of how much time they spend, but actually being able to just get the video recommendations that are truly good for them for the kinds of goals that they have, right? Because again, so we've got this person who, again, we've got the disciplined self, we've got the higher self and the lower self, to have a very rudimentary model, right? Your higher self, it wants to do things which advance you towards your goals, and your lower self, it wants escapism, avoidance, it wants to be enraged, it wants to act, it wants to, engage in the monkey mind scheme of things, right? Like it wants to be entertained, it doesn't want to do any hard thinking, any hard work, and that is still a part of you. Like I'm a work in progress, and I want to eradicate that lower mind completely, but still, it's a part of me. And so when I get these recommendations, like sometimes your monkey mind wins, right? Like you see two recommendations, and the monkey mind is sometimes the winner, in which recommendation becomes the one that you watch, right? Or out of the list of recommendations, you pick the one which is the easy one to watch because it's more fun, it's more entertaining. You don't have to think, you don't have to you don't have to incorporate that information into anything meaningful, right? Like when you're watching a video about solving a particular problem, for example, if you're learning how to write your own recommendation system, then you will want to take action after that, and that almost subconsciously prevents you from taking action there. But on the other hand, if there's this sci-fi movie that you love watching and there's this particular part of it that you just love, then that's just going to be reinforcing feel good things that you necessarily don't, a part of you wants, but the higher part self does not want that, right? So system could actually be built taking this into account. Similarly with Twitter, for example, like you could say that only show me tweets that are good for me, or tweets that don't enrage me, or tweets that are healthy and wholesome, and tweets that are educational rather than enraging, and tweets that are supposed to draw a certain emotion, right? And these obviously would require advanced ML AI algorithms, and it would require NLP. It would require you to understand the context. It would require you to understand the emotions behind these tweets, as in what are the emotions which these kinds of words elicit from users. And so, an example I think would make things clear. There's a particular tweet, let's say it's the US elections next week, and there's this tweet about Joe Biden, which is obviously supposed to, the poster of that tweet wants to make people mad about something that he did, right? So, in that case, I'd stop saying that. In that case, a system which interacts with all the people who interacted with it, well, an LLM like GPT-4 would actually know how people would respond to that particular tweet because it's been trained on a ton of similar tweets with similar sentiments, right? So sentiment analysis, I mean, it's such a simple task for these models now. But you can have that as another filter to refine your experience even further. And that's actually a part of Curato, which is something I was building to create the most controlled, the most personalized curation experience for you for all the media types that you interact with, for all your digital interactions, for all your internet use. But that's for a separate conversation. Now, what I'm going to do is 26 minutes, I think that's long enough. What I could do is I could talk about designing a painting recommendation system and visual experience recommendation system, because that's something that I'm building. I'm super excited. I'm not going to share too many details at this moment, because there's something about saying something about something which almost feeds that desire to want to bring it to the world as soon as possible, right? Like, you should just try to work in silence for as long as possible and then unleash your creation once you're ready, rather than drip feeding and stuff like that. But what I'm building, basically, it's a hardware product that curates and then displays these paintings and visual experiences based on a deep analysis and understanding of the user's preferences, likes, dislikes, values, goals, etc. Right? So over here, what I'm gonna do is, again, I want to take an asthma, and this actually uses LLMs to a large degree, to a substantial degree. So over here, you want to, which makes it a much more refined system than I think YouTube's is. Yeah, I think the difference would be, YouTube probably gets you to 98% of the way, right? And another thing about humans is that when we think of recommendations, to some degree, if something's above 50, then it's a yes. Something's below 50, it's a no. So that simplifies the recommendation dynamic substantially. Over time, we're obviously going to develop systems that are much more nuanced, and the number of gradients are substantially more, the number of steps are substantially more. For example, a recommendation could lie in sector 1, which is above 75% satisfaction, could lie in sector 2, which is above 50%, sector 3, 25 to 50, sector 4, below 25%, right? So we could have more involved systems over time, and we will be developing these. But for the time being, I think most people are happy with the kinds of systems that they deal with. I think the next step change would be incorporating not your dopaminergic responses and desires, but what you actually want, right? So when I use Twitter, for example, I only want to see educational feeds, and there are loads of really smart people on there who tweet out some really insightful, some really brilliant stuff that I would like to keep updated with, but also don't want to deal with a lot of the nonsense, a lot of the political nonsense, which makes lots of people who tweet about politics and technology, right? And because I like that tweet about technology, or rather, technology, then the algorithm thinks I also would like that tweet about politics, which is not the case, right? So something that can incorporate what you actually want of an algorithm, where you can actually state that, these are the kinds of things I'm looking for from my app experience, And these are things that I absolutely don't want to see, right? Like, I don't want to see any news events. I don't want to see any politics. I don't want to see any stuff that is supposed to enrage me. Well, I'm at the point where hardly anything can enrage me. But for example, if I see a tweet about, bombs being dropped on children in Gaza, obviously it's going to sadden me, right? But I don't want to see those. Not because, I want to hide from the truth or anything, but like, I can't do anything about that at the moment, so it'd just be a waste of time. Same with politics. That whole philosophy about politics and interest in politics is until the point that I can actually make a meaningful difference in the world, that I can actually move the needle, there's no point in me wasting a second, an iota of my time in learning about what's the political landscape doing, or how's it vibing. It just does not matter, right? So yeah, the next change, the next evolution in these systems, recommendation systems, is going to be taking into account having an LM layer that understands you very, very deeply. LM layer could be an AI layer, could be a different paradigm. I think again we are building something, and it's probably going to be a neuromorphic layer. So an AI layer, let's just use the umbrella term, that can understand you and that can send stuff, your recommend you stuff that is connected to your current goals and to the complexities of how you want to use the app on that particular day. Like, right. So on some day you might just be looking for fun, you might just be looking for leisure, you might just be looking for entertainment. And so for me, I actually set Saturday as that day where sure I can browse, I can use YouTube and I can watch fun stuff on it, the kinds of videos that I might like watching. But on all the other days, Saturday and Sunday, on all the other on the weekdays, I just need to stick to the educational content, right? So that's the rule. And again, these are the kinds of things which are really difficult to embed into these simplistic algorithms. But over time, that's just going to become, that's where we're headed. And then obviously the step change after that would be your implants providing just the perfect stuff for you. And again, you would be able to communicate consciously the kinds of things that you want. So this implant thing could be hijacked substantially, right, by these companies, where this is there are these kinds of videos that hit you right in the feels or get you feeling a certain way, which is good for, not good for the long-term person that you want to be, but good for the company. And there are loads of examples of these kinds of things, right? Like, it keeps you on the hedonistic treadmill, on the dopamine treadmill, basically. And again, you want to have a layer where you can communicate with the AI in your chip. That's okay. No stuff like that. I don't want any of that nonsense. I just want stuff that's completely aligned with my highest self, my highest values, right? So that's going to be the next stage. And I think that's going to be the ultimate stage of it. Yeah. I can imagine how you can better that, how you can improve upon that. Because once you incorporate all the things which are happening under the hood, inside of this thing, what else is there to incorporate, right? Like, sure, you can refine the model, the AI that does the curation and does the recommendation, but those are the details. I'm talking of the architecture at the moment. Architecturally, I think this would be the pinnacle. This would be the paragon. This would be the Everest of recommendation systems. And I think we are going to get to that point probably in 10 years. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it for the time being. Thanks for the time. I'll see you soon. Cheers.